and welcome to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. I'm Luke Plimmer.
And I'm Liz Plumpton.
And we're delighted to be back for a second season of the podcast. Each episode takes a look at a different aspect of the wonderful world of amateur theatre and features an amateur theatre maker talking about their theatrical life, theatrical loves and the times when they've died on stage.
Our Backstage Pass feature takes us behind the scenes at the Crescent Theatre, Birmingham, to discover more about what goes into making a great amateur production. And this month's episode is going to be a little bit different, since Luke and I are going to be lifting the lid on some of the backstage business that goes on in not one, but two forthcoming productions at the Crescent.
This month's episode is all about stage portrayals of love. John O'Neill will be talking to actor and musician Hugh Blackwood about his life and loves in amateur theatre.
Meanwhile, Luke and I will be taking a look behind the scenes of the catchily titled musical I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change, and the Tudor romcom Shakespeare in Love, adapted for the stage by Lee Hall from the 1998 film of the same name. The Crescent Theatre is putting on the musical I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change by Joe DiPietro and Jimmy Roberts from the 17th to the 24th of September. The show takes a light-hearted look at love and relationships at every stage and from every angle, from disastrous first dates to the pick-up techniques of the geriatric set and the twilight years of life. I'm delighted to be joined by one of the actors currently rehearsing the show, Luke. Yes, the same Luke who's also presenting this episode. So, Luke, you've just finished a rehearsal.
Yes.
Tell me a bit about the show.
Okay, so the show is sort of this modern take on, the different ways that love can exist. And that can exist in many different ways. So it might be, for example, first dates, it could be marriage, it could be being a parent, as you've mentioned, the twilight years of life. But it does it in a sort of comedic and satirical way. To an extent, I think a lot of the comedy also comes from the relatability that hopefully a lot of the audience will pick up on. But they do this as well through different styles of music and different types of song. It's just a very, very fun time.
Sounds great. So I'm not a musical person, and this might seem a strange question, but how do you actually rehearse a musical?
Well, with this specific one, for example, we started off by rehearsing some of the big numbers that we were going to do. The show ends with a big 6-part a cappella number, and that was very difficult to learn naturally. So we actually started off to begin with learning some of the key musical numbers. And then what we've done since then is we've then done rehearsals where we've been blocking and where we've been acting out scenes, and then we've done scenes where we've blocked out certain songs. So we've brought the two together. Sometimes you focus solely on vocals, sometimes on choreography, sometimes on blocking and acting, sometimes they might overlap. Yeah.
And I actually sat in on the last 10 minutes of the rehearsal that you've just finished. And one of the things I found interesting was listening to the musical director working on a song with one of the actors.
Yes.
So a lot of the songs are people sort of singing about their inner thoughts and feelings about dating and relationships. How do you go about kind of interpreting songs like that?
Well, I suppose it depends on the style of the song first. If it's a serious song, you're going to make sure that, you're not delivering anything comedic, for example. Or if the song deliberately is quite out there and quite over the top, I think that's sort of when you sort of play into that side of things. But I think also it depends on the direction you might be given as well. Like the director might, or directors in this case, might say what they think could be going through the characters' minds at this moment, and then you might bring your own ideas and own interpretation to that, and it sort of builds on that really, I think. So, yeah, and I think that kind of approach is needed because in a way, as a cast and crew, we all sort of have our own experiences and own interpretations of certain events and certain lines and certain moments from our own experiences that have happened in the past. But they might all be different, and that's what I think
You've got to bring them together.
Absolutely.
Part of that process. Because also, what I noticed from watching that little bit of rehearsal was how important the timing is between. So this is a fairly simple band for this show. It's a piano and a violin. But, if the actor decides to phrase something in a certain way, could that put them out of time with the music? If the emotional interpretation starts to change the speed?
Yeah, I would say as well, what's been a really key part about this musical as well is that not only just rehearsing the times of singing with the band, but also the times of speaking dialogue. And I think when a certain scene has a certain tone, the sort of style of the song and the way that the band might play the song and the accompaniment sort of has to complement that, I think, and they sort of have to work together.
So how did you first get into performing in musicals? This is not your first musical, I think.
There are two answers to that question. The first one comes from, as a little boy, loving the film Oliver and basically forcing my brother and sister to act out Oliver in the front room. And obviously in the film, Mr. Bumble has to pull Oliver's ear. So my little brother, sorry mate, was Oliver, and we obviously recreated that with maximum force.
Of course.
But the other thing that I think at high school, my love for it was properly nurtured there when I ended up doing musicals like Little Shop of Horrors and Oliver. I think during that time, my love for acting was really, really, fostered, and it became, something I was a lot more enthusiastic about. And then a few years ago, in 2017, when, Oliver was happening here, that was the first show I did here, I auditioned, and I've been with the theatre ever since, and it just feels really fitting, really, that the show that really got me into theatre in the first place, even if I didn't realise it at the time, was the first show that I did here, really, and there's sort of been a renaissance. It sort of rejuvenated my love for it, really, and yeah.
So what do you enjoy about being part of musical theatre?
I think there is this feeling that you get when all the vocals and the choreography and the band and everything comes together. You sort of get that feeling of sort of like an exhilaration when you're on the stage, and also you want an audience to feel that too. So when you feel that exhilaration, and also you're hopefully making the audience feel that same level of exhilaration, there's sort of that connection that you sort of feel and that you sort of have, really. And there's this huge sense of accomplishment, because obviously types of theatre that aren't musical will have their own challenges, but I think musical has its own unique type of challenges as well, that when you overcome those, it's certainly very fulfilling, I think.
So the show I Love You, You're Perfect Now Change
Yes.
is the second longest running off-Broadway show in history.
Yeah.
It ran for 5,003 performances, very precise figure, between 1996 and 2008. What do you think it is about the piece that's made it so popular and successful?
Well, I think, yeah, it's interesting because the musical itself, and especially our version of it, we've deliberately, in a way, tried to make it sort of set in the 90s. But I think that relatability element is still very much there, and those sort of feelings that you feel and your own thought process and the scenarios that you might find yourself in, again, whether it be first dates, marriage, being a parent, for example, those things I think are still relatable. So obviously there are elements of our version of the musical that might seem like they're of their time. I think as I say, the feelings and the message and the lessons that we could all learn from them, certainly I think are very, very timeless, and I think that's why it's just so relevant now, really.
I think you've got a whole generation of people, of which I am one, in their 40s who started dating in the 90s,
Yeah.
and it was like the Friends, the TV show Friends,
Yes.
era. So I guess, for us, it's probably
Yeah.
not, it doesn't seem as dated as maybe it does to someone like you're a bit younger
Yeah.
than me, Luke.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and it is different, and there are some scenarios today where that might be a bit different. Like, I think people getting to know each other through technology, for example, is a lot more prominent now, and it certainly wasn't back then. But I think those same feelings and questions that you always ask yourself are still very much prominent. So while I think the style of how dating seems to be presented or perceived has changed and evolved in some ways, I think the hopes and fears that we might have surrounding it are still very much the same. So I think that's
Absolutely.
what makes it still relevant.
And probably still the same in the other show that the Crescent's doing this September, Shakespeare in Love,
Yeah.
which deals with a relationship that starts, in the 16th century, but actually those anxieties and uncertainties and things that can go wrong have probably been the same for 400 years, if not longer.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what's your favourite song in the show?
I think, one of them is the very last song that we sing, which is that 6-part a cappella song, because
What's that called?
Epilogue. No, it's called I Love You, You're Perfect Now, Change, I think, funnily enough.
Okay.
But I think that's one because all 6 parts sort of, sound very nice together. Hopefully they will on the night as well. We'll cut that bit out.
So when you say a cappella, there's no accompaniment?
There's no accompaniment,
Right.
yes. So we sort of get a starting note and we sort of have to listen to each other and follow each other and sing together. But I also think that there's a song before that called I Can Live With That, which is a song between 2 old people who are sort of reminiscing about the fact that, they're in the later years of life and they have lost people and they're just sort of trying to find happiness, whatever shape or form that might take, and it's just a really lovely melody and, it's great to have musical songs that go all over the place in terms of vocals and really stretch the singer's abilities, but it's also really nice to have something with a nice, simple, sweet melody, I think, sometimes as well, and just sort of let the honesty and the sincerity of the song come through, really. So that's my favourite. It's also the song where I have to use a Zimmer frame, so...
We'll look out for that one.
Yeah.
So what's been the most challenging aspect of rehearsing this show for you?
I would say this is the first musical I've done with a cast this small. The musicals that I've done in the past with the Crescent Theatre and all across the board have had pretty big casts. Oliver, Spamalot, The Wizard of Oz. They do have pretty big casts. With this one, there's only 6 of us in the cast, so I think that is quite challenging. So as a result, you find that there's a lot more responsibility. You have, there's a lot more pressure to get the songs right, to deliver a lot more punchlines with gags, to get those key moments across, really. You have more to do, basically, as a performer, which is a challenge that I very much welcome, and at this moment in time, it seems to be paying off. Yeah, but I think I've never had... I've played the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, and obviously that was a huge and big role, but I was still part of a much larger cast and crew. With this, it's been very, very small and very laid back, really, and yeah. So I think that side of it really has been quite challenging.
And there's nowhere to hide.
There's nowhere to hide.
When there's only
Absolutely.
6 of you.
Absolutely.
You can't just shuffle off behind the chorus line. And
especially when some of the vocal parts, like you're the only one singing that part, for example, it's down to you, really. When I've sung with tenors before, there's usually been about 3 or 4 or 5 other ones, but, there are some songs, like that last one, where it's me singing one part when everybody else sings a different part. So, nowhere to hide. Yeah.
The original off-Broadway show was the site of over 50 marriage proposals during its 12-year run. Has the cast prepared for any impromptu proposals to take place mid-show during the Crescent production?
Not to my knowledge, but I will say that actually, I won't name them, but one of the cast members coincidentally ended up getting engaged during the time that we were rehearsing for this.
It's obviously something about this show.
It's clearly that show that must have done it.
So if any potential audience members are thinking about popping the question, come on down.
Yeah, come to the After Dark, we'll do it then. Yeah.
We're up for anything.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Luke.
No problem.
And now, new for season 2 of the Amateur of Life and Death podcast, we come to our quick fire questions, our backstage binaries. So I am going to ask for your instinctive response to the following quick fire choices.
Right.
At the end of the round, I will give you an opportunity to expand on or clarify one of your choices if you would like to.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready, bring it on, yeah.
On stage or backstage?
On stage.
Studio or main stage?
Main stage.
Act or direct?
Act.
Lighting or sound?
Lighting.
Rehearsal or performance?
Performance.
Tech or dress?
Dress.
Sing or dance?
Sing.
Hair or makeup?
Hair.
Modern or period?
Ooh, modern.
Comedy or tragedy?
Comedy.
Set or props?
Props.
Shakespeare or Sondheim?
Shakespeare. Ooh! Whoa, that was unexpected, wasn't it? I think you said Shakespeare or Sondheim, and then I didn't have time to process the second answer. But hey, apparently that's what my subconscious is telling me.
Is there one you'd like to expand on or clarify from those?
I feel like I need to clarify that last one just for the sake of my own sanity. What happened there? I don't know. Maybe I didn't process the word Sondheim fast enough. I think I might need to tweak that answer. Sondheim. I'm going with that one. Going with that. Sorry, Will.
You go with Sondheim. So why?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that one then.
I think Sondheim because, as I say, musical theatre really, and I do love doing plays. But as I say, musicals is really what is the main type of theatre that I do love doing more than anything really. And at the Crescent Theatre, in my opinion. It's just such high quality, so that's why I love doing them as much as I do, really.
So my question for you about the ones you picked would be, you said lighting.
Lighting.
But you're a musician and you're a singer, so I'd have thought sound. Why did you say lighting?
Maybe because I've always experienced how lighting can make, and I'll make it perfectly clear, I've got no clue really how either of them work, but I think with lighting it's all about, you can make you can light up the stage, you can make it look a certain way, you can use different kind of lighting effects. Maybe with sound, I just think of the big soundboard with all the dials and switches, and it's just completely overwhelming to think about, so that might be why I don't want to think about that. So yeah, maybe just lighting, because as I say, the imagery that you can create with that, and yeah. I think that.
Brilliant. Thanks very much,
You're very,
Luke.
very welcome.
Cheers.
John has been speaking to actor and musician Hugh Blackwood, who has been involved in the Crescent Theatre in many different ways in the past. Let's hear what they got to say.
Hello. For this episode's feature interview, we're thrilled to have Hugh Blackwood with us. Welcome, Hugh.
Hello, John.
Hugh, you've lived and breathed performing arts for most of your life. On your CV, there are around, and I've counted, 33 performance credits, mostly for acting, some directing, and you're the lead singer of the Atlantic Players, a soul band. There's so much to talk about. You joined the Crescent Theatre's Youth Theatre back in 1984, which was 38 years ago.
Thanks for pointing out the math there.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Although you moved away from Birmingham not too long ago, you were still on Main House stage as recently as 2017, playing Fagin in Oliver. What are your memories of the Crescent Theatre back in the 80s and 90s?
The first thing I want to say is that the Crescent Theatre is, without any shadow of doubt, I wouldn't be here or doing what I'm doing today if it wasn't at the Crescent.
And what do you mean by doing what I'm doing today?
So my day-to-day existence is teaching and working with young people, but as a drama teacher now down in Kent. But the stuff I've done with the band, any kind of creative arts venture of any in any way, shape or form, it's all been down to the Crescent. And I fell in love with the place back in about the late 70s.
Wow.
So Jackie,
that was before you even joined.
Yeah. So Jackie, my sister Jackie Blackwood, was a member here back in the late 70s, and she was in a production. There were two productions. She was in a production of Toad of Toad Hall, and I remember very much walking in a kind in the one. It was the winter. It was in, I think it was the December of like the late 70s. I can't remember the exact year, but it was around the late 78, 79, and I think, and walking down Broad Street and going down Cumberland Street one afternoon and watching these actors on stage and these costumes and these masks and things, and just being wowed by it. Totally just, this is incredible. And then meeting the cast afterwards. And I remember getting, there was a frog mask, or toad mask, sorry, because it was Toad of Toad Hall of Win the Willows. But this mask of Toad, and they all signed it. And I was like thinking, God, this is... So you've got your normal life, but then you've got this place where magic happens. So I was very lucky to find my thing to do. And then join here in like 84. So, yeah.
And what was the theatre like in 84? Can you remember? First memories of the
I think it's funny when you go, can you remember? I feel like some kind of like 200-year-old
artifact.
Yes, well, I'm a living relic. I'm like a cathedral, I'm old. I'm a bit old and a bit
But you
crumbly.
look very good for it.
That's a cathedral, isn't it? I'm old, a bit crumbly, but, the architecture's still pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm quite big and ornate. But if my body's a temple, that's what it'd be. But yeah, I remember, and it's weird sitting where we are. So we're in the costume vault, where there's just steeped with history. And so sitting where I am right now and looking, it feels very similar to how the old theatre was. But there's very much a community, the real energy and community feel. Everybody that was there. They loved doing theatre, but they loved each other. I've made friends for life. Obviously people go off and do their own things. But there are friends of mine that I'm still very much in touch with, and some of whom have have moved on, you know, and are working as professionals, you know. So like the name that automatically springs to mind is Rena Mahoney, who was recently one of the leads in ITV's The Bay, and I feel nothing but immense pride, you know. To see your friends on primetime television, and you're thinking, we were just like kicking around in the mid to late 80s doing this theatre malarkey. And I posted a photograph recently of me and Othello and touched upon the fact of how grateful I was to the Crescent. And she kind of just added a comment of like, me too. And so we, you know, my love of Shakespeare comes from the Crescent. Her love of Shakespeare, I think, comes from here as well.
There's definitely, isn't there, throughout the history of the Crescent, there's a blurred boundary between what people do in an unpaid, what we call amateur capacity, and how that sometimes then translates into a springboard for people.
And I think, I sometimes feel the word amateur is denigratory. Because I think, you know, I tend to call it non-professional. And certainly with the theatre and its facilities, you go to you go to professional theatres. I've been to, you know, I now live in Kent, and so I go to a couple of theirs. They're like some of the theatres in that area, and I look at the facilities, and I think, God, the Crescent's a massive inverted commas, an amateur theatre company, and yet it's got this just incredible facility.
And what was the previous facility like? Because this is our third theatre.
Yeah, smaller.
On Sheepcote Street. And the previous one was on Cumberland Street.
That's right, yeah.
And I've got a vague memory of that. I visited it when I was, I think, 17.
Yeah.
But what's your memories of it?
Just smaller, a lot smaller. I mean, I think when I go to other theatres, there seems to have been a particular design. So you walk into some theatres now, I've gone into them and I've gone, this was clearly built in the 60s. That kind of, there's a sense of that brutalist art about it.
Yeah. Art in inverted commas.
Yeah. But I don't mind a bit of brutalism myself. You know, you know, there's a beauty within it. But like, you know, the old theatre, I think, you know, the bar, everything was smaller. The rehearsal room was also occasionally used as a studio performance venue as well. And the main house, I mean, it was just, the only thing I can say, it was just a smaller environment, and people very much fighting for space. The parties were to die for, I think. I mean, I remember even in the mid-90s when I rejoined as an adult theatre member, it was such a way where you closed the curtains and you could forget about the outside world. It was very much that kind of environment that you felt very much cocooned. Yeah. And you wouldn't know that it was the morning until you heard the birds tweeting. And you open the curtain and you go, breakfast? You know, everybody would like, let's just get some bin bags and put the bottles away and whatever. So there are people that have met, fallen in love, had kids.
There's so many, it's countless, you can't even, because it's such a, people don't necessarily come here looking for love.
No.
But like you say, it's community and people get to know each other.
It is, and I think if you're single and if you're performing on stage and playing lovers of you know, it's you understand why partners of people that aren't part of that don't. It's the same with bands. If you're not in a band, you don't. You know, I'm sorry to say this, you don't get it. You don't. You know, people talk about this band this and band that, but you don't get it really unless you've been in one. The relationships that people build, often you might do a play for a couple of months and you become very tight, and then you move on. Whereas here, you become very tight and then you kind of just, I'll see you again. So even though I've moved to Kent, and yes, I've got family and friends here, I don't ever feel like I've truly ever left the Crescent. The fact I'm sitting here kind of plays part.
Yeah, it lives within you.
Absolutely, constantly, you know. And what I have loved about the Crescent is that, irrespective of background, you know, there's a certain meritocracy about things. Nobody's standing there going, can't cast that person because they're black.
Yeah.
I can't cast that person because they're trans. I can't cast that person because they're female. You know, and it's about boundary pushing. It was interesting playing Fagin in Oliver, there's a part of me that really does question whether you could have a Gentile or a non-Jewish person playing that role at the moment.
Mm.
There's a part of me that questions that, and I think it's good to question it.
But when you were a boy and you found this wonderful new space, which was the Crescent Theatre, did it matter, or did you notice, or did you think that the stories that were taking place on stage spoke to you and your truth? Truth is maybe not the right word, but you and your upbringing, your situation, your working class life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did those stories speak to you?
They did. Yeah, well, they must have. They must have, and I think I just used it as a place to escape, really. And I think my mum and my sister, who are almost, we're a very aspirant family, and I think it was a way of, I think because there's the black, if you're black, there is that very much that sense of you have to work X times harder than anybody that's, say, white.
And have you found that to be true?
It's kind of, at times. I mean, it's weird because people will say, are people ever racist to you? I say, all the time, because there are always little microaggressions. And I think it's a scale. So I think prejudice is, sometimes it's unconscious. People don't realise they're doing it. Sometimes it's conscious. And it's kind of, it's a sliding scale. It goes up and down. Or something. But then again, it goes, like I said, about talking about challenging stereotypes and challenging perception and pushing for diversity. And like we're saying about the fact of playing Fagin, a couple of people I think did think almost when Tiff cast me.
She was the director.
She was the director. Some people were saying things like the whole, I think, like a black Fagin, and to the point that when we came to the After Dark, I kind of had prepared my response to this, just in case somebody said something. But it's good that people, in one hand, it's good that people challenge.
What would have been your response if I'd have said to you as an audience member, I don't think there should be a black Fagin?
Well, you look at the history.
I don't think anybody should play a Jew apart from a Jewish person apart from a Jew.
Yeah.
What if you were faced with something like that?
And there's part of me that very much agrees with it, if only because the fact that when you look at casting and looking at that lived experience, that's where we are now. We're talking about people having lived experience and bringing that to the table and bringing that to the performance. My lived experience, obviously, is about feeling like an outsider in terms of my ethnicity. So there's a kinship there. But I did my research, and there were Ethiopian Jews.
Yeah, there still are quite a few.
And there still are, and that religion permeates across the globe. And I kind of had this little backstory of thinking, I wonder if because he's within Lionel Bart's Oliver, he's very, he's very flamboyant and he's very big and he's larger than life. And I kind of thought, I wonder if he was a child of of the circus and were his parents performers and like living literally like hand to mouth, kind of that kind of existence and stealing and thievery and all that. But having that heart, again, Lionel Bart's Fagin is very much that.
I said a moment ago that there are 33 performance credits on your CV. Can you pick out 2 or 3 pieces that stand out and let us know what it is about them that resonated with you, that resonated with audiences? These are the loves of your theatrical life.
That's like picking.
Yeah, it's like name your best song. Name, you can't do it.
Name which child do you want to? It's really hard. I thought about this. So I suppose I have to pick Forum, for example, happened on the way to the Forum, because that was kind of.
And who's that by? Can you remember?
So that's So the director's Alan Marshall, but it's Stephen Sondheim.
Right.
Did the music for that.
So it's a musical.
Not our production. Yeah, it's a musical, and it felt like I was coming back I'd gone from being a youth theatre member. That was really important because I was coming back as an adult theatre member and rejoining, and kind of people kind of going, oh God, you've grown and you've matured, and so that was a real moment. But I think of things like you know, Othello was big because it was kind of I'd done leading roles or supporting roles, but the fact with Othello, you kind of your name's above the door.
Yeah.
You know, there's a sense of that, and
so you played Othello in Othello
by
Shakespeare.
By Shakespeare, yeah, in 2004, and it was also the sense of, because Othello isn't just any play. Black actors, when they've played Othello, there's a real sense of representing our community and our culture. So it's kind of like you kind of are very aware of the weight of that.
And
that
in
goes
terms of
along with it. Sometimes quite it's not talked about. Well, it's probably talked about between actors, but you know, consciously you're sometimes aware of it, and very unconsciously you kind of, you know, it's.
And people with big roles, people will sit in that theatre with their own expectations of what that role should be, and you fight against that a little bit, don't you? One in your own mind, and then two in the theatre, and you've got to find your own.
But the interesting thing with Othello is that because it's now played by black actors, it's usually only black actors that will probably think, well, I'd play it like this, because I imagine most white actors now don't look at Othello going, well, I'd play it like this, because again it goes back to lived experience.
And was Shakespeare ahead of his time in terms of? I'm not fully on top of what themes and currents swish around it in the play itself.
Well, from what I understand, I think, you know, so it's kind of it's set in I think there was an actual more of Venice, and again historically Othello would probably not even say you know, African in the way that we would consider him, that in terms of, you know, how he's played now. And I'm sorry to any historians that are listening going, rubbish, but, you know, I just think that, I think where he's ahead of his time is the fact that even though Othello does something that is repugnant, there is still a sense of, initially what we are presented with is a man that is decent and good and loving and noble and intelligent and caring and cultured and calm, very calm, you know, just a rounded person who then opens his heart to somebody, and somebody sees that and then takes complete advantage of it. And I think audiences probably sit there sometimes and think they're by the grace of God go I, because we've all felt jealousy. But imagine somebody manages to manipulate your soul to the extent that it provokes you to murder somebody. And sadly that does actually happen the world over, you know.
The amazing thing is that Shakespeare offers us these.
That's where he's ahead. That's where he's ahead.
He offers us these wonderfully rounded characters.
I think if you write,
takes us on their journey.
There's a part of me that thinks you write 38 plays. What do you expect? A couple of them are going to kind of hang around, aren't they? Yeah. You know what I mean? Well, you imagine artists writing 38 albums, and each one, you might go 5 or 6 might be around in a couple of years' time, and so there's and certain plays fall in favour and certain plays fall out of favour. But I really, you know, Othello is a play that, and it goes back to the demographic of the Crescent. The Crescent hasn't had many black male actors that have been a part of the theatre, you know. And what's great now with a part like Othello is that it doesn't necessarily need to be played by a black male; it can be played by black females, and because that adds now another dimension to it all, which I'd love to see. So yeah, I think I think Shakespeare's ahead of his time because of the fact that we're still feeling lots of the things that he talked about and discussed, and that's where you go, well, you must have been ahead of your time, because we're still talking about it now. So things like ambition and love and greed and jealousy and lust and passion and intrigue, there's still things we do now.
The human condition. Can you give us a short reading from it? Because it's Shakespeare and it's out of copyright, we're allowed to read extracts from it, and I thought it might be nice if we had a bit
Okay, I'll give it a go. It is the cause. It is the cause, my soul. Let me not name it to you, you chaste stars. It is the cause. Yet I'll not shed her blood, nor scar that whiter skin of hers than snow and smooth as monumental alabaster. Yet she must die, else she'll betray more men. Put out the light, and then put out the light. If I quench thee, thou flaming minister, I can again thy former light restore, should I repent me. But once put out thy light, thou cunningest and pattern of excelling nature, I know not where is that Promethean heat that can thy light relume. When I have plucked the rose, I cannot give it vital growth again. It must needs wither. I'll smell it again on the tree. Oh, balmy breath, that dost almost persuade justice to break her sword. One more. Be thus when thou art dead, and I will kill thee, and love thee after. One more, and this the last. So sweet was ne'er so fatal. I must weep, but they are cruel tears. This sorrow's heavenly. It strikes where it doth love. She wakes.
Thank you so much.
Honour, mate. Really good.
Thank you for
I've
coming
loved it.
on our little podcast, and I've had a wonderful time.
I've had a
chatting
wonderful
to you
time as well, man.
Over
Thank
the past,
you.
we've been talking for an hour and a half of it, but thank you so much.
Thank you, boss.
That was John talking to actor and musician Hugh Blackwood. Playwrights teach us nothing about love. They make it pretty, they make it comical, or they make it lust. They cannot make it true. So says Queen Elizabeth in Shakespeare in Love, one of two plays concerned with love that the Crescent Theatre is staging in September 2022. Shakespeare in Love is the stage adaptation of the Oscar-winning 1998 film. It's on at the Crescent Theatre, Birmingham from 24th of September to 1st of October. And it's an epic love story which imagines the inspiration for Romeo and Juliet as the forbidden love between Will Shakespeare and a noblewoman called Viola de Lesseps. The production calls for a large ensemble, singing, live music, sword fighting, an Elizabethan theatre to be built on stage, and period costumes. Lots and lots of period costumes. I popped into the Crescent wardrobe to find out more about costuming a 16th century extravaganza and about what goes on in a costume fitting. So I'm currently ensconced deep inside the Crescent's wardrobe, and I'm delighted to be joined by Rose Snape. Rose is the wardrobe supervisor for Shakespeare in Love. Hi, Rose.
Hi.
And today I've managed to catch Rose in between a number of costume fittings. So just down the corridor there's a rehearsal taking place for Shakespeare in Love, and periodically before, after and sometimes during the rehearsal, actors are popping in for what is known as a fitting. So Rose, I wonder if you could just tell us, or for the benefit of the uninitiated, what does it mean when wardrobe asks an actor to come for a costume fitting?
It usually means that we as people in wardrobe, the wardrobe department, have measured the person concerned, and we have read the script, and we try to make sure we know what the character is like. It's not always possible, but that's what we try to do. And then when they come for the costume fitting, hopefully we've found something that represents what their character is meant to look like. Doesn't always work, but we try.
So as a wardrobe supervisor, what are you hoping to achieve from a fitting? So an actor comes in for can be anything, maybe up to an hour even. It depends what they're trying on, doesn't it? But what's your kind of aim for that session?
Hopefully in that session we fit them for all the characters that they're supposed to be in the production. Sometimes it can be a cross-dressing or an animal or whatever, but we try, if we can, to do the fitting all in one go so that we get the size right, and if any alterations need to be made, that we can make them. If anything else needs to be added to the costumes, like lace, or if it has to be extended to make it bigger or make it smaller, that's what we try to achieve in that particular fitting.
And the Crescent wardrobe, which we're sitting in at the moment, is absolutely vast. It's probably got about 8 rows of floor-to-ceiling rails of costumes. There are also floor-to-ceiling rails across the back. How do you know where to start when you're picking out costumes for actors to try on?
Sometimes it's from memory, because we remember what has been used in a previous production, and the rows of costumes are in period order, so that we can go to the particular rails to see if we have something of that period, whether it would be 1960s dresses to Elizabethan costumes that we're doing now.
So the row we're sitting in at the moment, what period are these costumes-ish?
These are robes going from clerical cardinals, medieval robes, Elizabethan dresses, Roman costumes as well. So this is the earlier historical costumes in this particular section.
You see, to me, they just look like lots of nice material, so I am quite amazed at how you can just know that.
Well, I actually love it in here, and I know that a lot of people who come in for the very first time are just in awe and really just want to try on anything that they can, which is wonderful, and they get a nice experience if that's what they want to do. But it's not always possible to allow people to do that because we get so busy. But it is a nice place to come and actually get away from everything, and it's a nice place to have fun. And I think, well, I try to make the costume fitting as fun as we possibly can, because that's important. And I think it's important that people like what they're wearing and that they feel their character would wear that particular dress or robe or whatever, because you need to feel that you can move properly in a costume, sword fight in a costume or whatever, die in a costume maybe, but I think it's important that it's the right costume for that person.
And so Shakespeare in Love has a large cast of, I think, including all of the musicians now, in excess of 30 people. And it's a period play. It's obviously set during the Elizabethan era, during Elizabeth's reign, towards the end-ish. What are the things you have to think about when you're trying to find the right costume for an actor in a show like this?
I think it's trying to keep it as authentic as you possibly can. And working on a budget is quite difficult, because quite a few of our costumes are verging on earlier Tudor, sort of Henry VIII's time, going through to Elizabethan and afterwards. But we don't have enough of one particular period for the play to be all Elizabethan. So in that respect, we are cheating a little bit. And the thing is, people don't have much Elizabethan costume these days, so we're having to improvise in a way.
So when you say Tudor, so for example, that there's a lot of male characters in the play, and the wealthier men wear doublet and hose generally. What's the difference between an Elizabethan doublet and a Tudor doublet? Because I probably wouldn't know, so you can cheat and I won't know in the audience.
Well, the earlier Elizabethans had the balloon type trousers,
Yeah.
and then later they were lengthened. So we have a mixture of both. So we're taking it that some of these people could have had costume given to them or clothes given to them, as the wealthy people used to do. They used to give their clothes to the actors if they were interested in the
theatre. A bit like charity shops.
It is a little bit like charity shops, and that's what used to happen. So I'm hoping that we can get away with the cheating.
Yeah,
and
of course.
different
But of course,
periods.
there's a theatre within the play, isn't there? And there are a play is being rehearsed and then performed within the play. So I'm sure, our costumes aren't always bang up to date, are they? Even in a modern thing,
No.
People do hold on to nice things or things that they've been given over a period of time. So, if you found suitable costumes in the fitting and it's gone fairly well and you've identified things that you think will work, what happens to those costumes next?
We actually put them on rails with the person's name on, and they have everything on that particular rail. They have doublet and hose, they would have tights, they would have shoes, a ruff, a hat, if that was necessary for their
So all the accessories as well.
Yes, they would have everything together, and then that rail would then be taken into the dressing room on the day of the technical performance, so that it's there ready for them to put on.
So is that how you keep track of whose costume is whose then, is by naming?
Yes, we
part of the
normally, if we
rail?
can, people normally know what costume is theirs. But sometimes if you have cloaks and the cloaks are the same, we have to label those, because otherwise a short person could take a tall person's cloak and go on stage and then they would look ridiculous. So we name things that are duplicated.
Yeah.
Ruffs, for instance, look all the same to some people, so their names will all be in the ruffs. The names are in the shoes because sometimes people lose a shoe, and then if the names are in, it's easier to find.
It's a bit like primary school then, everyone's going around with little name tags.
Absolutely, and shirts especially, if you want to launder them in between shows, you need their names in the shirts so that you don't get them mixed up.
So what's the most enjoyable thing about doing a costume fitting for you?
For me, I think it's actually being with the actors who are in a show, because then you get to know them, you get to know what they're doing. And it's nice when a person comes in who's in a show, puts a costume on, and then they start walking around in the character and it looks right. And I think that's the important bit and the special bit.
Yeah.
And it encourages you then to move on to the next person. So for me, it's the interaction with the actors. And if you see them on stage in the costume that you've chosen for them and it looks right, then that's wonderful. Really is a nice thing.
Do you think costumes help actors to sort of develop their character as well? Or, people talk about finding their character with things like shoes, don't they?
Yeah, I think if they can come in early and they see the costume, I think then it gives them a basic idea of how they're going to move, especially in a new pair of shoes or boots. You walk differently, and I think that helps with the character.
And what are the challenges of fitting costumes for a show with a large cast and period costumes?
For me, in this particular instance, it's sizing, because you look at a costume and think, oh, that would look good on whoever. And then when they come in, because everybody's shape is different, the costume doesn't fit. And then you're back to square one and you're having to sort of get other things for them to try on. It's not that the costume will be wrong in the end. It's just that the one that you actually saw them in isn't the one that fits, so you just have to carry on.
I guess
until
with period costumes as well, they don't have a label in them that says, you know, like, so if you were costuming a show that was set now, modern clothing has clothing sizes, but I'm guessing it's a bit different when it's, you know, a doublet or pantaloons or, you know, medieval dress.
Yeah, because a lot of these costumes have been made for individual people, and so it's made to a particular person's measurements, and we all measure differently, don't we? So what you think is a costume that will fit somebody 36, they may in fact be 38. So
or 36 and a half.
Well, yes. I mean, they can be extended, but that's the problem. And sometimes you end up having to try things on at random to see whether they work as well. So it's a challenge, a big challenge.
Thanks ever so much, Rose. So finally, the sort of theme of this month's episode of the podcast is love, because we're doing 2 shows at the Crescent in September, which have, well, both the word love in the title, but also are sort of about different types of love. For you, what is it that you love about working on costume?
I've always loved the theatre, and I've always loved to see what people wear. And that's been from a very young age, when I saw Judi Dench at the Rep playing Juliet. So for me, it's just the drama of the costume and I don't know, how it brings alive the stage. Hopefully, this one will as well, but we will leave that to the audience.
We've got every confidence, Rose. Thanks ever so much for speaking to me.
Thank you for listening to the Amateur of Life and Death podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, make sure you subscribe at podcast.crescent-theatre.co.uk or via Spotify or Apple Podcasts to get the next episode.
You can find out more about the Crescent Theatre Birmingham and our upcoming productions, including I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change, and Shakespeare in Love, by visiting www.crescent-theatre.co.uk or by following us on social media.
Amateur of Life and Death is a Crescent Theatre production. It's presented by Luke Plimmer, Liz Plumpton and John O'Neill. It's been researched and edited by Kevin Middleton, and the music is by Brendan Stanley.